My sister survived 14 months in a war zone. She came home with a Purple Heart, a medal this country gives only to those who were wounded in battle, a duffel bag, and the kind of quiet in her eyes that only comes from seeing things most people never will. She made it through all of that, and then a woman with a clipboard and a neighborhood association badge tried to have her removed from my front porch. This is the story of what happened next. And trust me, you are going to want to stay until the end. My name is Derek. I'm 43 years old. I work in supply chain management, and I've owned my home in the Pinehaven Ridge subdivision in Austin, Texas, for going on 6 years. I am not a dramatic person. I don't post on neighborhood apps. I don't attend every HOA meeting. I pay my dues. I keep my property clean, and I generally operate under the assumption that if you leave people alone, they'll leave you alone. That assumption, it turns out, had an expiration date. My sister Renee is 37. She enlisted in the Army at 18 years old, fresh out of high school, with nothing but a backpack and a determination that I recognized even then as something rare. In the nearly 2 decades since, she has completed 3 overseas deployments, earned the rank of Staff Sergeant, and built a career that I am genuinely proud of every single day. She is also one of the most composed human beings I have ever encountered. The Army either finds people like that or makes them. I'm still not sure which applied to Renee, but either way, the result was the same. She does not raise her voice. She does not panic. She does not flinch. Those qualities were about to be tested on a quiet suburban street by a woman named Carolyn Bates. Renee arrived on a Thursday afternoon in late October. She pulled into my driveway in a used gray pickup truck she'd bought 2 weeks after landing stateside, stepped out with her duffel bag over one shoulder, and looked at my house with an expression I can only describe as relief. I walked out to meet her, and we stood in the driveway for a moment without saying much. That's how it is with us sometimes. We don't need a lot of words. She wasn't moving in permanently. She needed a few months, time to decompress, handle her transition paperwork, figure out her next chapter. She was quiet, disciplined, and went to bed earlier than anyone else on my block. She woke up before sunrise and had already cleaned the kitchen by the time I came downstairs most mornings. She was, without exaggeration, the most low-maintenance guest imaginable. Carolyn Bates had a different opinion. Carolyn Bates had been president of the Pinehaven Ridge HOA for 5 years. She was the kind of person who treated a volunteer neighborhood position like a full-time government appointment. She sent weekly emails. She photographed violations. She had once filed a formal complaint against a homeowner for a wind chime she deemed acoustically disruptive. I had managed to avoid direct conflict with her for 6 years. Minor interactions here and there, a note about my recycling bin placement, a reminder about gutter cleaning season, but nothing serious. I was a clean record in her files. That changed on Renee's 4th evening. Renee was sitting on my front porch after dinner. Civilian clothes, dark jeans, a plain hoodie, boots. She had a cup of tea and she was watching the street the way people do when they've been somewhere chaotic for a long time and they're still learning to appreciate stillness. She wasn't talking to anyone. She wasn't playing music. She was just sitting, breathing, existing. I was inside watching television when I heard footsteps on my porch steps. I looked out the window and saw Carolyn Bates standing at the bottom of my steps with her arms crossed and her neighbor Phil Garrett standing behind her like a reluctant backup. I came to the door. "Derek," Carolyn said, skipping any greeting entirely, "I need to ask about your guest." I told her that was my sister. "How long has she been here?" Carolyn's eyes moved to Renee with a slow, deliberate quality that made my jaw tighten. "There have been concerns raised by multiple residents. An unfamiliar vehicle, someone present at unusual hours. The community has a right to know who is—" Renee, without turning her head, said calmly from her chair, "You can address me directly. I'm right here." Something flickered across her face, surprise maybe, or irritation at being interrupted by someone she'd clearly expected to stay quiet. "I'm simply doing my due diligence," Carolyn said. "Noted," Renee said and took a sip of her tea. Carolyn left. I watched her go and felt a cold unease settling in my chest. 3 mornings later, at 7:18 a.m., 2 police officers knocked on my front door. I opened it half awake, still in my pajamas, completely unprepared for what I was looking at. They were professional, respectful, clearly somewhat uncomfortable. They explained. They'd received a report of a suspicious individual at my address, someone who had allegedly been observed surveilling the neighborhood and behaving in an erratic manner. I repeated those words back to them slowly. because I wanted to make sure I'd heard correctly. Surveilling. Erratic. That's my sister, I said. She was sitting on my porch drinking tea. They asked if they could speak with her. I said absolutely and called for Renee. She came to the door the same way she did everything. Calmly, without hurry. She looked at both officers without any visible tension or anxiety, just that steady, quiet presence that I'd grown up watching and never fully gotten used to. The officer asked for her name, her relation to the property, and her length of stay. She answered all three without hesitation. Then he asked for identification. Renee reached into her back pocket and placed her military ID card in his hand. He looked at it, looked at his partner, looked back at Renee. The shift in his posture was immediate and visible. He straightened slightly. His tone changed completely. "Staff Sergeant," he said with a quiet respect that filled the whole doorway. "That's right," Renee said. A silence followed that felt much longer than it actually was. "Ma'am," he said, handing the ID back carefully, "we apologize for the interruption. Thank you for your service." They were back in their car within 2 minutes. I stood in my doorway staring at the street, long after they pulled away. When I turned around, Renee was already back in the kitchen. "You okay?" I asked. She didn't look up from the counter. "Derek, I've been in places where the walls had bullet holes. I think I can handle a Tuesday morning in the suburbs." I was angry in the way that doesn't burn hot and fade. It settled into me like cold weather. I knew who had made that call. I couldn't prove it yet, but I knew. That afternoon, I sent Carolyn Bates a formal written email documenting the police visit, identifying Renee as my legal guest, and requesting a written explanation of the complaint process used. I kept every word professional. I kept copies of everything. Her reply came within the hour. 4 lines. No apology, language about community safety and association responsibilities. 2 weeks later, a formal notice of violation arrived in my mailbox. It cited a bylaw about unregistered long-term occupants and included a fine of $275 with a deadline to either register Renee formally or confirm her departure. There it was, in writing, signed. I sat at my kitchen table that evening and looked at that letter for a long time. Part of me, the exhausted part, wanted to just handle it quietly and move on. Pay the fine. Let it be over. I told Renee about it. She read it, set it down, looked at me. "Is this right?" she asked. "No," I said. "Then we don't accept it," she said simply. "I'm not a problem to be managed, Derek, and you shouldn't let anyone treat either one of us like we are." I contacted a housing rights attorney the following morning. I also filed a formal complaint with the county's civil rights office, attaching a full documented timeline, the porch visit, the police call, the written notice, with timestamps and copies of every communication. The attorney's review was quick and decisive. The violation notice was legally unenforceable given Renee's actual length of stay. More significantly, the pattern of complaints, starting from day 4 of her arrival, escalating to a police call, and culminating in formal action, created a serious fair housing concern that no HOA wanted documented in a public record. A local community journalist picked up the story after I reached out. The piece ran online and described the full sequence of events, including the detail about a decorated returning veteran being reported as suspicious while sitting quietly on her brother's porch. The response was immediate. The HOA board held an emergency session 8 days after publication. Carolyn Bates submitted her resignation before the meeting took place, citing personal reasons in a brief letter that said absolutely nothing of substance. The board, now under temporary new leadership, formally withdrew the notice of violation. They issued a written statement acknowledging that the complaint leading to the police visit had originated from a board member and was inconsistent with association standards and community values. The fine was canceled. Every cent of it. Renee finished her 4 months and left on a quiet Wednesday morning in early spring. Same way she'd arrived. No fuss, no drama, just a duffel bag and that steady calm she carries everywhere. I walked her to her truck, and we stood in the driveway for a moment, the same way we had when she arrived. Not many words needed. Before she got in, she looked at me and said, "You did the right thing not letting it go." I watched her drive down the street, past the house where Carolyn Bates used to sit by her window watching the neighborhood like it belonged to her. And I thought about what it means to serve a country, come home, and still have to prove you belong on a porch. Some people will never understand what it costs to give them the freedom to be exactly this small. And that is perhaps the saddest thing of all.